Alexander Volkanovski made history on Saturday night, becoming the first fighter coming off back-to-back losses to reclaim UFC gold. So can we say that Volk is back to his best and expect a legendary title reign at featherweight? Or do we need to not be getting carried away? And based on what we saw on Saturday night, pump the brakes on that a little bit. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 5 things we learned from the UFC 314 main event, Volkanovski against Lopes. What did it tell us about where Volkanovski is as a fighter? Did we learn anything new about him? And what did it tell us about what's next? Hello guys and welcome back to Fight Energy. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you enjoyed the fights on Saturday night as much as I did. I've already posted my breakdown video of Paddy Pimblett against Michael Chandler. So if you haven't watched that yet, please do after this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're into UFC chat. I do technique breakdowns all the time, reaction pieces and stuff like that. And comment below if there's anything new that you learned about Volkanovski in this fight. But before we do get into the 5 things that we learned from this fight, and I will be using a couple of fight clips to help demonstrate my points, I want to give my overall assessment of the fight itself. And for me personally, I've watched it a couple of times now. What really stood out for me is the fact that there just is a gulf of class between Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopes. That was obvious to me. Diego Lopes at this stage of his career should have had so many advantages, being the younger fighter, should have been the hungrier fighter you'd have thought, and of course had that massive power advantage, which did almost work in his favour. But overall, Volkanovski's timing, his in and out movement, his strength, it did remind me of the Volkanovski of old. And if you saw my prediction video beforehand, I was on the fence for this one. I said either Diego Lopes early, which almost came off at the end of round 2, or Volkanovski late. I actually said he could have Diego Lopes chasing his shadow. And although that wasn't completely true, it was more Volkanovski initiating these exchanges in the pocket, which really stamped his authority on this fight. And look, it might sound as though I'm getting carried away by Volkanovski's performance. It was very impressive, but there are a couple of things I saw which do make me a bit more timid in saying that he's going to be going on a long title reign. But the one thing that you cannot doubt is the man's resilience, the guy's mental strength. So the first thing that we learned from this fight is how mentally strong Alexander Volkanovski is. Now, we knew beforehand that he's a very resilient guy. He's got himself through really tough fights, really tough times outside of the octagon. He admitted it, that he had these struggles when he wasn't fighting. So we know that the mental resilience is there. But he showed it in this fight to another level. And I will be using a fight clip to make this point. But really, for Volkanovski, coming off 2 bad knockout losses to Ilia Topuria and Islam Makhachev, you'd completely understand it if he did question himself, if he did have these doubts. But the way that he initiated these engagements in the pocket with Diego Lopes, where he knows how hard Diego Lopes hits, he was the one meeting Diego Lopes in the middle, forcing him back. We'll take a look at this clip now, because it really does help to explain the point that I'm trying to make. This is 2 minutes 30 into round 1. Diego Lopes, he likes fighting up close and personal. He loves engaging in the clinch. Volkanovski threw that right hand, smothered Diego Lopes, because Diego Lopes was going for that uppercut. And if Diego Lopes had just stood in range, he could have been caught by it. But Volkanovski keeps moving forward, keeps moving forward. He's got very good footwork, Volkanovski, moving in and out. But here, he knew that he just had to go forward. And you can see that overhand right beautifully lands flush on his chin. And he does eat a short left hook, which is more of a parry. It's barely a left hook. But Volkanovski does eat a shot on the way in, and he must have known that he has to eat a shot to give one back. That's the kind of fight you're going to get involved with Diego Lopes. And for Volkanovski to show himself and everyone else that he's willing to engage in the pocket with a real hard puncher, that was the first mental battle won within the first round, and you must have given him a lot of confidence moving forward. So the first thing that we learned from this fight is just how mentally strong Alexander Volkanovski is. He didn't completely change his fighting style. He still met fire with fire, beating a hard-hitting fighter like Diego Lopes. However, he almost became unstuck because of these tactics at the end of round 2. And this leads us very nicely to the second thing that we learnt in this fight. Naturally, there had been question marks about Volkanovski's chin heading into this fight. Look, if you come off the back of 2 knockout losses, your chin is going to be the first thing that gets questioned. Islam Makhachev being head kicked by a lightweight, that's quite forgivable. But then coming back down to 145 and being badly knocked out there as well, people were going to start to question him. Forget the fact that Ilia Topuria might be the hardest hitting 145 we've ever seen. So I've pulled up this clip from the end of round 2 where Diego Lopes does drop Volkanovski. And in a similar fashion, Volkanovski misses with that left hook. Lopes slips out the way. Volkanovski is a bit laboured in getting out the way. His left arm actually seems to almost get trapped, if you see it there. His left arm, that's a very bad line that I've just drawn. His left arm seems to get trapped on the hip of Diego Lopes. So maybe that's a reason why. They're in so tight here. Volkanovski showed such balls in this fight. Let's keep it playing through. Lopes seems to be calling him on. That jab. So Volkanovski, technically you always say he's very, very good, but that left hand after the jab went straight to his hip, not ideal. So Lopes catches him with a jab of his own. Volkanovski tries a check left hook, which Diego Lopes dips under, and then this right hand over the top. Cracks Volkanovski on the side of the head, sending him to the canvas. Now, this isn't one of those where you see Volkanovski's legs completely go. It's a forceful shot to the side of the head that sends Volkanovski crashing to the mat. But as you can see here, he already gets back onto his knees. There was no seconds where he was dazed, where he thought he was really hurt. He's already trying to wrestle up from there. And look, the argument might be that that was just pure instinct and he was badly rocked. But to me, it seemed more like a flash knockdown and didn't actually give me any real concerns about his chin, which is such a positive for Volkanovski. I know that I'm probably going to be accused of only seeing the positives from this performance, but I'm not deluded. It's never good seeing a fighter taking that kind of damage, getting dropped at all. And seeing Volkanovski getting drops in his third or fourth consecutive fight isn't a good sign. I actually don't particularly rate Volkanovski's chin. I think if you do connect clean on him, he is liable to a flash knockdown, but often not much more than that. I do want to rehash the point. Ilia Topuria, he punches like a truck. KO'd Max Holloway, for goodness sake. And the Islam Makhachev head kick. Those two knockouts can be forgiven. Don't be thinking that Volkanovski is chinny because of that. He caught a good shot there, but recovered very quickly. So the second thing that we did learn from this fight at the weekend is that whilst Volkanovski doesn't have the best chin in the world, far from it, he doesn't have a terrible chin. He can get caught by a flash knockdown, but I don't have any real concerns in that department. So guys, we're going to move on to the third thing that we learned, and I hope you are enjoying this style of video. I used to do them quite often, these 5 things that we learned. I think I will bring them back. And the third thing that we learned is the insane skill and strength of Alexander Volkanovski. If anyone had forgotten, if anyone had thought that he'd missed a step, you just need to watch one sequence in this fight which just reminds you how good Volkanovski is. I don't care that this has become a bit of a Volkanovski loving. He deserves it. An absolute legend of the sport. Is he the GOAT at featherweight? Let me know. I'm going to bring up this next clip because it demonstrates 2 things. It demonstrates on the one hand the strength of this former rugby player come down to featherweight. He's not the big. He doesn't look like the biggest guy, but you can just see that his strength, his squeeze is just on another level. So as you can see here, he's engaged in a clinch with Diego Lopes. And as we look back at the Dan Ige fight with Diego Lopes previously, we know that Lopes does favour this position. But Volkanovski's happy to engage. And he just drops his hands from that tie clinch that was from the back of on the back of Lopes's head to a body lock position around his waist. And he gets an overhook on this side. He gets an overhook on this side and an underhook on the far side. And then just drives Diego Lopes back to the fence. You can see that Lopes's back's tensed. He's probably trying to push the other way. At least he should be. He tries to get the whizzer on that side, but there's no gap for it. Just forced back against the fence. Absolute tank. So the raw strength, this is something I really do want to point out that Volkanovski has. And that'll be one of the last things to leave him. I know that he is 36 years old now, but he's never been a fighter who's had to rely on insane speed, insane cardio. He generally paces himself very well. So when we are looking at his long-term prospects, especially at featherweight, as long as his strength stays and his fight IQ still appears to be there, I do think he's got a good chance of one, if not two, potential title defenses. And as I said for the third thing that we learned, I do want to couple this with the insane skill. So it's the insane strength and skill of Volkanovski. He has Diego Lopes up against the fence here, and he's got one grip around his waist there. And here he's got him pinned up against the fence and just unleashes some bombs. And look, these aren't small punches. You see it a lot of the time when fighters are engaged in a clinch against the fence. They can just get those short shots off. But the angle in which Volkanovski positions his body means that he can put his shoulder, he can put his back, he can put everything into these punches. So he hooks Diego Lopes's leg there. Somebody comment the Japanese name for this trip. But a lovely trip there, controlling the upper body, sending his upper body down that way. And his right leg is just off screen now, but he's just elevating his right leg as he turns and dumps Diego Lopes down. And it's just a fantastic display of both strength and skill. And that's exactly what got Volkanovski into this position in the first place. Being able to rely on clever trips, clever wrestling that does use some strength, but uses a hell of a lot of skill as well. He's such a well-rounded fighter, and I think that Saturday night reminded everyone that this is a fighter with immense skill. So the third thing that we learned from this fight is that Volkanovski does possess insane strength for 145 and such high-level fight IQ. And I'm sorry to say that I probably have lured you into a false sense of security, thinking that all these things, all these 5 things that we learned are going to be positive for Volkanovski. Volkanovski fans are on cloud 9 right now. But unfortunately, the fourth thing is about his level of opposition and the performance that Diego Lopes put in. I just think it was substandard, so it might be giving us some kind of false hope about just how good Volkanovski is and whether or not he is back to his very best. I think Lopes, he was quite lazy in this fight. He didn't really force the action. He allowed Volkanovski to take the centre of the octagon. And I think anybody going into this fight would have thought, any high-level 145er would have thought that that first round was so important to get Volkanovski's respect, have him questioning himself. But Lopes just didn't force the action there. And I'm sure that him and his team conducted their own game plan. Whether or not he stuck to it is another question. But I think for a fighter, not to bring the action to an opponent who's coming off 2 KO losses was a massive mistake, and possibly allowed Volkanovski to gain that confidence and make him think that he was doing better and had more faith in his chin than he would have done otherwise. So the fourth thing that we learnt in this fight is more of a question than an answer. And did the substandard performance by Diego Lopes make it look as though Volkanovski had returned to his very best? I guess that's the question that will only be answered by Volkanovski's next performance. But I was really disappointed by Diego Lopes. I felt like he may have been overwhelmed slightly by the moment. Maybe he was shocked, as we just saw in that previous clip, by the strength of Volkanovski, a tank able to hold him up against the fence with one arm and strike him with another. But I do think that Volkanovski wasn't really made to go through the gears. That flash knockdown at the end of round 2 and being hurt by that shot to the eye in round 4 were 2 moments that maybe had him questioning himself slightly, but there were no real moments where he had to dig deep and pull through. I think the optics for that 4th round eye injury were a lot worse than the reality of what actually happened. It looked as though Volkanovski was really hurt, holding his eye moving backwards, but you could see that he still put in a really good display in that round. So I do think purely based on Diego Lopes's performance, and I don't want to take too much away from Volkanovski, because obviously you can argue that Diego Lopes didn't perform because Volkanovski didn't allow him to perform. But I think that's letting Lopes off the hook a little bit. I think he could have initiated a lot more action. I think in that 4th round where it did look as though Volkanovski was compromised at least, Lopes could have gone through the gears then. We just didn't see that. So the 4th thing that we learned is that perhaps Volkanovski might not be back to his best. He might have just fought a fighter who was far from his best. And before we get on to the 5th and final thing that we learned from this video, I'm going to ask once again that you do subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below if there's anything you learned from this fight. Do you think Volkanovski is back to his best? The 5th thing that we learned from this fight is about who's next. Who's next in the featherweight division for Volkanovski to make his first title defense as a 2-time featherweight champion. Now, there's been loads of names chucked out there. Movsar Evloev, Yair Rodriguez, Jean Silva, Gene Silva. We're going for Gene Silva, Jayon Silva, Jayon Silva. I heard the broadcast said a few different variations. But I just want to go through quickly the pros and cons of each one and whether or not Volkanovski's post-fight press conference and what we've seen in X since gives us any inkling of what's next. Well, firstly, Yair Rodriguez. He made the claim that you only have to come off one victory for a title shot. And I just think that Yair Rodriguez's self-promotion in fight week might be his undoing to getting that title shot. Because that beef with Diego Lopes at the press conference, very entertaining, perfect for the UFC when they go to Mexico. That's already written, that makes so much sense. Look, Yair might be using this as a bit of leverage to get a bit more money for that fight right now. That's what I'm thinking. I don't think that he really thinks he's going to get a titled fight yet. Maybe he does. That might be going back to the fighter delusion. Anyway, moving on. Jean Silva, Lord Silva, let's just call him Silva. He's got the case to make that he's knocked people out in spectacular fashion, really entertaining. But ultimately, he just beat the 13th ranked fighter in the division. So I think he's still a far cry from a title shot. 2 fights at least before he's really up there. Top 5 guy, title contender guy, title shot. I want to see him keep putting on these entertaining performances. You don't want to see him derailed against Volkanovski, although I do see that fight matching up very well for Silva. He's a hard-hitting guy, explosive, full of confidence, will really put it on Volkanovski, and that's probably the last fight that Volkanovski wants right now. The most realistic fight and what I think will happen next is that Movsar-Evloev fight. I'm trying to work out, and I probably will do a tactical breakdown about how I think that fight would go. But Evloev, he's a very, very good grappler, very strong guy, but is he as physically strong as Volkanovski? He might be able to get better of the grappling exchanges if it comes to that, but I don't know if Volkanovski will allow it to come to that. I think he'll be really good at clinching up with Evloev, not allowing him to get access to the legs. It could be quite a dull fight, quite a point-scoring fight by Volkanovski, but I do think that's most likely the next fight to happen in the featherweight division. I think Evloev deserves it more based on his most recent fights. So I'm going to go ahead with that. And the fifth thing that we learned from this weekend's fight, with Volkanovski winning in the fashion that he did, and the other contenders winning in the fashion that they did, I'm still not going to let either Rodriguez or Silva leapfrog Evloev to that title shot. The fifth thing we learned is that Volkanovski's first title defense should be against Movsar-Evloev. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, hope you enjoyed this format, and I'll see you guys later.